Howdy, folks. Welcome back to Redneck Gone Green. This is your old pal David Cobb coming at you as we used to do every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, but we've been on a little bit of a break, and you'll notice I got a handsome fellow with me. Hey, Jackrabbit.
Hey, David. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Great to be here.
So y'all, looky here. Jack and I had some time off, and I do want to just name and really center. Part of that break was because Kelly, Jack's longtime partner, lover, and huge supporter of both Jack and Redneck Gone Green, passed away. We did a show honoring her, and frankly, Jack needed some time off. He took it. And I want to actually center the fact that that happened and normalize the bereavement, right? We love you, Jack, and we're glad to have you back. And just wanted to honor Kelly because she was such a big part of our audience and support here.
Yeah, she was great, and she was just like such a supporter of the show, and you know, she was always giving me pointers on like, you know, how to make it better, and you know, and she was just like always great to see her in the chat and participating and stuff like that. And definitely, yeah, I mean, she really did help me to feel like, you know, we were really doing something good and doing the right thing. So yeah, I mean, I miss her terribly, and that's just the way it is. And I don't know. That, you know, the nice thing is there's a memorial that's actually happening the weekend after next up in Connecticut for her. So I'm really looking forward to going up there and being with some of her friends and kind of just, I don't know, just holding space in that way. So that should be interesting. It's been tough though. I mean, I definitely have been feeling it in the past couple of weeks in a way that I didn't expect to. I thought I was over it. I was not over it. So. But yeah, thank you very much for saying all that, David. I really appreciate it. And I think it's really gracious of you to, you know, just focus on the human. And I think that is a really big part of what kind of motivates us to be doing this work, is to keep in mind that we're human beings, we're working together as people. That's, you know, and just being kind and compassionate to each other is really how we make a future that's livable, you know, and it's sustainable for all of us. So I think it's consistent with our fundamental principles to actually, like, you know, share that compassion, that kindness. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And this redneck is not afraid to say, I love you, Jackrabbit. And it was such a treat to get to know Kelly through this podcast, this program. And I want to remind you folks, here on Redneck Gone Green, we've always said, or I used to start every show with, you bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to convince you to do so as well. Now, I want to be clear, I still am a registered green. And of course, this never was a rah-rah Green Party a show. Like, this was not just spilling out Green Party talking points, although I always said in elections, we have to tell the truth. And I like to say with elected officials or with candidates, I will cheer whenever they do something good, and I will jeer when they do something bad. I'm going to tell you straight up, probably not since Teddy Roosevelt had Republicans given me very much to cheer about. And frankly, not since FDR have Democrats given me very much to cheer about. Although there have been a couple of things that they have done right, but I've mostly had to jeer the two parties, the two corporate parties. And I'll continue to do that. But the shift that I'm going for these days is actually, I think that we have to take seriously what do we mean by engaging in electoral politics without being electoral fetishists. That's something I think that's critical. And I hope, Jack, you and I can spend a little bit of time talking about what that shift means. And that's why, hey, get back on here on this screen, man. We're going to make this a conversation. So, Jack, how's this landing for you?
Well, I mean, I think I think it's really important what you're saying, right? But what I would like to hear from you a little bit is like why, you know, there's the electoral fetishism. There's also the need for third parties, and I guess kind of like what I would like to hear from you, because like I think that there are some of us who are seeing clearly that the Republicans and the Democrats are two sides of the same coin. And I think that's really, really coming to the forefront now that the Democrat candidate has started to is really campaigning for the general election, which means that they're not focusing on what is considered to be typically Democratic party kind of policies, right? Like your kind of standard Democratic primary policies, stuff like what would they be, like abortion and a bunch of other stuff as well. I'm sorry that I'm not like kind of getting at them like right ahead, but we're seeing like with stuff like with what's happening in foreign policy, like both parties are going to continue the wars around the world. That's not going to end by any stretch. We're also seeing like I don't know if you've seen it or not, but there's like Joe Biden is putting out memes about how excited he is that he's increased drilling. There's more energy production in the United States now, and he's like posting memes about that. Kamala Harris has said similar stuff like recently on her stump about how she's like really this just very vague and non-committal stuff. I'm not sure if there's recently an interview that she gave with Dana Bash where she was like, I'm not against fracking. I used to be against fracking, but I'm not against fracking anymore. It's very concerning. But we're seeing it more than ever that there is this coming together really in many most significant ways between the two parties. So
Well, looky here. I think it's
go ahead.
important
Yeah.
that we acknowledge, right, that the the Democratic Party has, for my entire life, and I'll be 62 years old in a couple of months, but for my entire life, the Democratic Party has a playbook. In the primary, it's called fake left, run right. So they fake as if they're progressives or leftist in the primary, and then they run right in the general election. And that is a tried and true thing that the Democratic Party has done. And frankly, I think most Democratic Party voters have fallen for that. And the policies show, right? And I want to say something very clearly. In electoral politics, if you get taken for granted as a voter or a constituency, friends, you just got taken. And what has happened with the Democratic Party is that they take for granted women's votes. The Democratic Party takes for granted people of color votes. The Democratic Party takes for granted organized labor votes. The Democratic Party takes for granted environmental groups. They take those votes for granted. Literally the entire constituency that makes up the Democratic Party, for the most part in the general election, the Democratic Party takes them for granted. And that's why they get taken. Like what you don't see is sustained demands on the part of those constituencies during the general, because they literally become voter ID and GOTV outfits for the Democratic Party.
Now,
And
David,
yeah,
David, I just want to just pause you, because yes, all to that. The thing that I would kind of like, I want to hear from you a little bit is, one of the things that I'm seeing was that when Biden it was Biden that was running, right? It seemed like there was like very little overt energy around the Democrats, right? And once they swapped out Kamala, right? I saw this transformation on like on social media for people who are leftists, right, or who I would have considered leftists, where they just really all fell in line. It was stunning, to be perfectly honest with you. It was shocking and stunning. And thanks for for that comment, Dave. I appreciate you saying that, because this was actually, I wanted David to kind of really comment on this and think about this. Is what can we do to really get through to people at this point? What makes it so important? What makes the third party so important, right? In a way, how can we communicate to people who, once Kamala started running, they were like, all right, Kamala's a woman of color, right? I mean, like, Donald Trump's, he's Satan, and we need to get him out. And it doesn't matter that, children are being killed in Palestine, right? Because Donald Trump is going to drop more bombs and kill more kids, right? So it's kind of like, I don't know what's going on, David. It's really like, it's hard. My brain is melting, because otherwise, people who are otherwise seem to be intelligent people, right? Thoughtful, intelligent people are falling in line with these Democrats. What's going on?
Well, again, Jack, it reminds me of some of the conversations you and I had back in 2016 and 2020 around Bernie Sanders, where I know that you were really deeply disappointed in Bernie Sanders when I was not, right? Like, because he did what I expected him to do. And I literally, one thing I was surprised about, to be very blunt, I did not think Joe Biden was going to drop out. I thought he was going to hang on, refuse to drop out, and that Donald Trump was going to win the election. That's what I thought was going to happen. Donald Trump was clearly forced out by the Democratic Party
Joe Biden
operatives. Joe Biden was clearly forced to drop out. That surprised me. What also surprised me was the speed at which the entire Democratic Party operation, just like that, fell in line behind her. I got to tell you, Jack, and viewers, listeners, watchers of Redneck Gone Green, I would have lost any amount of money if people had wanted to bet me, hey, Joe Biden is going to drop out. I'd have taken that action. Then if you said, and within 48 hours, Kamala Harris is going to be the nominee, I'd have said, you're crazy. I'll take that action too. I'd have lost 2 bets. So now, as I pontificate as a pundit and tell you what I think is coming next, take it with a grain of salt. But here's what I think happened, Jack. I think what happened was that the standard liberal progressive voter was heartbroken and sick to their stomach, because they too knew that Joe Biden could not beat Donald Trump. And the polling data showed it. And Joe Biden's campaign and the debate sealed the deal for most Democratic Party voters. So Kamala Harris coming in, remember, it didn't drastically change the polling. It drastically changed the narrative. It dramatically changed the excitement around women and people of color. And folks, that's identity politics, straight up, right? A woman of color as the presidential nominee is exciting to a certain group of folks, the same way that Barack Obama, as an African-American, being the Democratic Party nominee, was exciting. And I get it. I do. I've had somebody say, you don't understand, David, having somebody that looks like me in the White House. I've never seen that. It's like, all right, I get it. But I'm a white man in this country. And you know what, y'all? I've had nothing but people who look like me, except Barack Obama, in the White House. And all they ever did was screw over working class people. So I don't have any illusion that having somebody
about
that
representation
looks like me does any bit of good, right?
Yeah.
It does not matter. So, Jack, what I want to say is the excitement and enthusiasm around Kamala Harris is a result of 2 things: identity politics and the power of the corporate media to create the narrative.
Yeah. And David, I don't think it's a coincidence that what we've seen has really helped to move you, right? I mean, it's not, that's,
yeah,
this shift for you. And and I think it's important to talk about the kind of the resolution, right? Because I'm seeing the same thing that you are. I find it to be incredibly de-energizing. I think that there's a real just a sucking away of enthusiasm and energy because of this just this what feels like a really overwhelming disconnect, right, between basic human values of just like compassion and thoughtfulness. I don't. It, what can we do, David?
Listen,
I mean, I feel
yeah.
like we do have a path forward, but it's hard to feel that way when there's this monolith, this leviathan of like corporate media, the major political parties, corporate America. Like, right, talk to me about, now you're talking to me, but you're speaking to like organizers and activists around the country. Tell me what your transformation was, and how you feel, how you hope that they can also look at what it is that we're doing going forward.
Well, I'll tell you, Jack, and I appreciate that. Like, again, I want to be crystal clear with folks. I still believe that elections are important and there is a role to play. I still vote and encourage people to vote, but I also understand that voting alone is not going to get us where we need to go. And the presidential elect, look, be very clear. I'm going to vote for Jill Stein, the Green Party nominee for president. I'm absolutely going to do that, but I'm actually not spending a whole lot of time or energy campaigning at the presidential level because I don't feel like I've seen actual organizing come out of that. So here is the shift for me, and that is, how can we engage in elections without becoming electoral fetishists? A couple of the points I want to hit. Number one, we've got to get more active and involved in local elections, right? Where we have more power to influence our elected officials and our candidates, right? So that's number one, local elections. Number two, we have to build progressive alliances where we say, whether you're a Democrat, a socialist, a green, whatever party label you have, we've got to start making demands that we will not vote for candidates that will not take a pledge that they will not seek or accept corporate money. Because I don't care how progressive you claim to be, if you are still on the corporate money bandwagon, you will at some point as an elected official sell us out. Period. Full stop.
So David, so the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear that, yes, 100%. I agree with everything you just said. And there's this thing called Wolfpack. I'm not sure if you remember hearing about it or not, but that was put together by Young Turks founder Cenk Uygur.
Yep.
And I mean, that one of their tenets is to not. That's right, Desert Manis. David, yeah. There's been a lot going on, my brother. So the reason that I wanted to bring this up is because I guess what I'm trying to, my main point, it's not enough.
No, it's not enough.
Like, that's like, it's good. It's a good step, right?
It's necessary, but not sufficient, right? So, but I'm laying it out. So that has to be part of it. Okay. And the second thing is, we have to come to understand that elections alone are not going to be able to create the world that we need, which is why I am absolutely committed to building solidarity economy organizations at the local level, but solidarity economy politics, policies, and practices to meet our objective material needs. Y'all, one of the ways I think about it is the state. And by the state, I don't mean the state of California. I mean, in the political science term or the Marxist term, the state, right? So whether the state is municipal elections or the city government, the county government, the state of Texas government, or the U.S. government, the state as a concept. The state cannot create the world that I want to live in. They can't do it for us because only we can do that for ourselves. Having said that, the state apparatus can help facilitate it. It can make it easier by supporting things like public banking and participatory budgeting and providing funding for worker-owned cooperatives and community land trusts and et cetera. But we should make no illusion that voting alone is going to get us that. Likewise, y'all, the state cannot prevent us from doing it unless they kill us or lock us up. And there have been times where that's what they've done to true revolutionaries and social change agents. But I want to be explicit and clear. I don't think the path is through the state. I think we relate to the state. It's sort of like a wild animal, right? Like you never turn your back and ignore a wild animal. So treat the state accordingly. It is a dangerous, vicious thing under the capitalist system. Having said that, right, we have to engage in voting as if it is a front of struggle or a tactic, but not the goal. And this is really important. Remember, here on Redneck Gone Green, we've talked about theory, strategy, tactics. Like these things matter. That's why I say yes to voting. We should be putting our focus on local elections. We should be building out coalitions of progressives that make it clear that you cannot seek or accept corporate money, and to stop voting for, especially at the local level, don't vote for people who are not willing to take that pledge. And here's the other point, Jack. I tell people, looky here, if you say, like me, that you want to see a transformed political economy, if you want to look and live in a whole new world, well, voting alone is not going to get you there, right? If you want to restructure society and all you ever do is vote every 2 to 4 years, friends, you are wasting your time. But there's a corollary to that. And that is, if you say you want to live in a transformed society and you don't bother to vote at all, you're wasting an opportunity. So the shift is, where should the focus of our time and energy be? So absolutely, I'm willing to talk about how to do elections. I'm willing to even talk about the role that so-called third parties, what I prefer to call alternative parties, have played throughout history. And it goes like this. It's a very simple recipe, Jack. I mean, it's super hard to implement it, but it's very easy to describe it. It goes like this. You need a mass movement of regular organized people who are conscious and working in a coherent strategy. So you need a mass movement, and then you need an electoral arm of that mass movement at the ballot box, right? So those are the two big picture things that need to be happening at the same time in a coordinated fashion. And when that happens, here is the kind of change you can get. Because I'm going to give you a list, friends, of what so-called third parties, what I'll say alternative parties, have been responsible for winning in this country. It's a hell of a list. You ready?
Let's get it.
The abolition of slavery, women getting the right to vote, the creation of the Social Security Administration, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation laws, pure food and drug laws, ending child labor, the direct election of the United States Senate, the ability for voters to actually choose the Senate as opposed to the state legislature choosing U.S. Senate members, which has been the case for the first 100 years in this country. Jack, the entire fabric of what we today would consider a decent and just society, that fabric was woven together thread by thread, strand by strand, by so-called alternative parties that were working with militant mass movements in the streets, in the pool halls, in the bowling alleys, right? So absolutely, there's a role for politics. There's a role for national third-party politics. But if and only if there is a militant mass movement that is connected to it. And I'm just recognizing and acknowledging, as painful as it is, in the 2024 presidential election, there is not a mass movement that is supporting the third-party efforts of either Cornel West or Jill Stein and the Green Party. We've only got a couple of months to the election. We're not going to create it out of whole cloth.
Or Claudia de la Cruz and
and Claudia de la Cruz and the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Want to lift them up as well, 100%. but they're going to be negligible. All three of those campaigns are going to be negligible. So, like, I wish that wasn't true, but it is. So,
Well,
what am
can
I
I
going
ask?
to do?
Right, but can I just ask you something about the basic principles? One of the things that you mentioned was kind of coalitioning, getting people to work together on the left to kind of like help build this movement that you're talking about. And I think for me, like one of the first things that kind of pops up in my head is that, when the presidential election comes out, everybody's energized around electoralism. People are energized around national politics. But for like the election itself, right? And I think that what we're talking about when we talk about mass movements, we're saying outside of elections there needs to be something. Now the thing is, David, what I want to hear from you is if you can help me to understand how you feel about principles and if there are shared principles that people can organize and rally around. Because my personal sense right now is that the left is a very loose network of different interest areas that don't really connect in any meaningful way, leading to this kind of like rising up around elections and a dissipating once the elections are over, disappointment, and then no follow-up. And so my question to you is, coalitions are built around shared principles, right? Shared ideas, shared principles, and shared outcomes. What are those, and how do they exist today? Is it possible to be able to actually rally people around like these goals that we're talking about, or like how do you see this stuff coming together, I guess is what I'm asking you. What's the mechanism?
First of all, I would say, and I mean this kindly but very clearly, Jack, I think that you're using the word "the left" incorrectly, because what I would say is there is no real organized left in this country. I think that's a part of the problem, because
I agree with that.
What we have, all right, so we're in agreement. So what we have are liberals and progressives who get fooled and fall for the okey doke. And they also fool for but the Republicans are worse. So we have to hold our nose and pull a ballot, not voting for the Democrat so much as voting against the Republican, which is why
Right.
I bet some of you who watch Redneck Gone Green know what I'm about to say, which is why we have to demand ranked choice voting and proportional representation. We have to change the voting system, and we have to make that a political demand. The second thing, though, and I think it's really even deeper, Jack, is I do think that genuine leftist should have a commitment, an unapologetic, unassailable conviction against imperialism and empire and war as foreign policy. And it's time for us to acknowledge and recognize that the Democratic Party is a war and party of empire, period, full stop. And like, unless and until folks are willing to make the dismantling of the U.S. empire and war a national election, war and empire will continue. And I'm not happy about that, but I'm also, and again, I'm not going to fuss at people about how they end up voting, but I think that voting does in fact have consequences, and continuing to vote for warmongers just allows mongering to happen over war.
Well, let me I want to comment on what you said earlier about the state, right? It's important, I think, to keep in our minds that the state is essentially the manipulation of public resources or collective resources. I mean, that's what the state is in a very abstract sense, right? I mean, it's like,
I
there's all
mean,
this
look, to
money
be clear,
coming.
it's not even manipulation. So yes, I want to be clear. Look, the state is just the decision-making process for how goods and services are allocated, right?
Yes,
The
right.
problem is that in this country, it's a corporate controlled process that actually, and this is where people who rail against the deep state from both the left and the right are actually correct. Like,
Yes.
elected officials have a role to play in that, but actually so much of it has happened at corporate boardrooms and are happening behind closed doors. We never get to actually vote on that.
Well, this is one of the really interesting things about this past election is it's kind of a Maskoff moment, because people, if they're really paying attention, are seeing that Joe Biden has been in office for the past 4 years, and the man is clearly, right, not running the country. Now, we don't know who is running the country. We don't know who is making these decisions, but it's definitely not Joe Biden, right? And so I think that what you're saying is, I'm not saying that this is like it's all about. I'm saying that it's a metaphor, basically. Like his presidency is a metaphor for what you're saying. That
listen, like, it is, but I also think that it's even deeper than that, because like the metaphor, right, is describing the reality, and the reality is that this empire is not a traditional nation state empire. It's a corporate empire, right? Like folks, like I'm originally from Texas. I live in California now. I am an unapologetic redneck. Again, my redneck credentials, they are impeccable, right? And this redneck will tell you straight up, I've got more in common with the working class person from Mexico or Saudi Arabia or Greece or Sri Lanka. Like pick a country. And I will tell you, I've got more in common with the working class person of that country than I do with either Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, right? Even though we have the same language and we come from the same country and et cetera, et cetera. That's because I have a class analysis. And when I say class, I don't just mean socioeconomic class. I mean the class of whether you own the means of production or whether you have to work for a living, right? And sell your labor. And this is the thing, Jack. A true leftist has to understand what class struggle means and why we have to be committed to it. This is why you will hear me constantly say we have got to engage using popular education, right? Break it down without dumbing it down, but we've got to do genuine political education. And not just exhorting people about who to vote for, but to say that we want to help you and all of us better understand reality, better understand who's in control of this country. And you may know, Jack, but Princeton University did a study about 5 or 6 years ago that told you that proved with good research methodology, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, what any fool in a pool hall or bowling alley could have told you, and that is the rich and powerful control this country, and that like opinions and even voting doesn't really matter that much.
It has no effect on legislation and legislative decisions. Nope.
And legislative decisions, right? And again, we should do a breakdown of that sometime, Jack.
Yeah, for sure.
The number of people, like, I'm not surprised that you know that study, but the number of people that I've come across that like challenge me on that or say, are you sure that sounds like hyperbole, Cobb? And then I have to find that study and send it over to them. Most people don't know about it. Let's do a show on that. I think
we'll do it.
Break it down and actually show, because here's the other thing, y'all. You know what really gets me is if you look at polling data, you will see super majorities in support of healthcare as a human right. And yet, whether Democrats or Republicans have super majorities in either, we never get it. It's an oligarchy, as Dave says, Dave Petrovich, who is also a frequent viewer of or contributor at Wednet Gone Green. It's an oligarchy, right?
100%, David.
And get this, it doesn't stop there. Protecting the environment, super majorities, raising the minimum wage to a living wage, super majorities.
Not sending weapons to Gaza.
Not sending weapons to Gaza is a super majority, even with the corporate media doing overtime trying to convince people otherwise. Like there's a level at which I got to say credit to the American people who are not falling for the corporate media when it comes to policy issues.
And now listen, David, I love your energy right now, and I'm going to ask you to share with us, I want you to take that energy and put it right into resist and build.
You
Are
got
you
it.
ready to do that?
You
Are you
got it.
ready to do that?
And thank you for that, because here's the thing. So again, I am passionate and I have clarity about what's happening, but I'm shifting. I mean, many people know that I used to, like during presidential elections, I would shift all of my energy and I'd really work my butt off during presidential elections. I'm not doing that anymore. Again, I'm going to vote and I encourage you to vote too. But my energy is now shifting to resisting the current harms and being willing to protest and demonstrate and do disruptive actions and nonviolent civil disobedience. So we have to absolutely resist the war machine. We have to resist the neoliberal Democrats and the neo-fascist Republicans. We have to resist. But we also have to build alternatives. And those alternatives mean worker owned cooperative businesses at the local level and community land trusts where we decommodify land and provide housing as a basic human right. We have to build campaigns for participatory budgeting and public banking and universal basic income. We have to build new community-led digital fabrication using 3D printers that are controlled by we the people and democratizing that technology. What I'm getting at, folks, is I am shifting my focus into a different type of dual power. And that dual power is not to ignore the state, but to stop focusing my attention on influencing the state. Instead, from the bottom up, building these organizations and cultures that actually help us help ourselves. It's like mutual aid, but going beyond a moment
Need.
of disaster or
Right.
immediacy and saying, what's our long-term plan to own it ourselves?
Can I say, like, so if we're thinking about this in terms of like the state, as you were saying, allocation of resources, right? So there are all these resources in this country, just massive amounts of resources, right? And what we want to do can't just be done with like mutual aid. Just like, I
Exactly.
have like, I've got a stone and let's make some soup. It's a lovely story, right? But the reality is that if we're really going to build in a way that's going to attract people, right, it's going to be attractive to people who are used to a certain degree or level of living, right? We need to be able to have resources to be able to generate, but they have to be put into something. And this is one of the things that I think is very important about this idea of resisting and building, right? Which is, we have ideas about alternative structures, ways of governing, ways of being together in community, right? This idea of public banking, participatory budgeting, co-ops, land trusts, etc., right? These are good structures that are more consistent with an idea of both expanding personal freedom, but also expanding the ability for communities to be able to support each other in a way that's sustainable, right? In a way that like is consistent with what we consider to be leftist values, right? And so what I find so important about this is that we are approaching this with the understanding of there needs to be something that is an alternative, which is we're putting that together in the way of economics, but also the way that we work together, the way that we make decisions together, the way that we are in community together, right? And so building that, but then kind of continuing to be paying attention to more local elections where we have more control and more influence at the local level, so that we can actually access some of those resources from the state, the existing state, right? Because I think for me anyway, it's important to understand that we want to make a state. We want to make
Yeah.
our own state. It's
And
a lot smaller.
right. And I love that, Jack, because absolutely, I'm not giving up on the state itself. I'm saying this existing state and the political system, the economic system, the voting system, like this is the problem. So I don't want to just get my hands on the mechanism of the existing state. I want to dismantle the existing state and rebuild a new state that is participatory, that is genuinely democratic, that is
Yes.
grounded in indigenous wisdom and a worldview of balance and sustainability. I want to actually get into governing ourselves differently. Because I'll tell you this, Jack, if we're not prepared to govern, we're not prepared to win. And I still think that we need to win a new world. So I'm with you 100% that we have to think about the state. But as you so correctly said, it has to be shrunk. And the reason for that, as you well know, Jack, because you and I off a camera were talking about the fact that the way the human mind, the brain itself, and the way our neurons fire. Jack, tell us how many authentic, real human relationships can the average human hold? Not just an American, but the average human.
Not just well, an American might be able to hold fewer, if we're being honest. But yeah, so what David, what you're referring to is called Dunbar number, and that is, the idea that we have a limited number of intimate relationships that we can actually establish and maintain, and that number is postulated to be 150. Now there are different tiers to the quality of that intimacy, right? So obviously you have relationships that are with your family or your close friends. Then there may be another kind of layer outside of that and a layer outside of that, right? But basically beyond that number, we really can't, our brains can't really handle or be aware of those kind of relationships. And so there's kind of like a hard limit on, like, biologically, on what we can manage, handle socially, right? And and we've talked about this, David. My personal belief is that this is kind of a big reason of why we have such problems at scale. Why, like, when society gets to be a certain point, that there are so many issues that we find, stuff like homelessness and mass incarceration, for example, wars, like these endless wars, like in other countries, right? Because, at a certain point, we just kind of like can't conceive. Now here's the thing, David. I don't want us to get too abstract about this, right? On a much more practical level, because I do believe that, to really answer the questions of society, we need to address them by understanding biologically we're only capable of having those relationships, right? But I think that when we're talking like the way that we've been talking about today, even with these resistant bill ideas, that is actually addressing it. Like being more democratic, being more authentically democratic, right, is addressing that. Because to be authentically democratic, we need to get smaller so that individuals can have more influence and say over the way that their society, their community is run.
Jack, you and I actually met each other during the Occupy encampments, right? Like I
Yeah.
remember vividly, and I remember, and I'm not blowing sunshine up your ass. What I remember watching you patiently, like go through the process, trying to help people, using some considerable technology skills as well. But I remember watching how you were so kind and patient and persistent. And what I also saw is that, oh, there comes a moment where there's just too many of us to actually do that process and to do it well. And that's the reason that I think it's so critical for us to say, let's recognize that, right? And so what we need are, like, look, there's billions of humans on the planet. So we can't just, and there's what, 375 million Americans, right? Like, and so if the Dunbar number is correct, and the research science looks like it really is, we can only have basically 150 really authentic social relationships. Then let's create systems and interlocking levels of circles within circles, where we acknowledge that scientific reality, and we depower, right? Or we send power, we decentralize power to not just city governments, but even blocks, right? Block associations or civic associations, where and then we have a government that actually reflects that kind of reality. That's what I'd be mostly
Right,
interested in.
like Brooklyn Ravi is pointing out, like block associations.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Way to go, Brooklyn Navi. That's exactly what I mean.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, and what okay, so back at, since you brought up Occupy Wall Street, I have to share this memory that I have about the General Assembly, right? So every night at Occupy Wall Street, at the like at a certain point, we would have these general assemblies, and so people would come together, and the idea was with the general assemblies is this was our governing body, and what we would do is people would come together, and there would be like, you know, there would be a stack where people would get on the stack, and then like you would get to speak, and then you would have your proposal, and then, you know, you would like tell everybody who was present what your proposal was, and you would be like, and that was like, and everybody would vote on it. Do you agree or don't you agree? You know, and it's like, you know, do you want to be a part of that or don't you want to be a part of that? And at first, the General Assembly felt so cool. It was like, it was just an amazing experience, right? Because I don't, some people might be familiar with what's called the People's Mic. I don't know if you've heard of it. If you haven't, what it was is we weren't allowed by the cops to have amplified sound at the park, right? And so there would be a point at which there were so many people, but they were far away from who was speaking. So what we would do is the person would say like a phrase, and then the people who were behind them would say the phrase again together, and then the people behind them would say the phrase, so that everybody around would just like in sequence, right? So that everybody could hear what the person was saying. Now, obviously, that kind of limited the, you know, how detailed, right, like the conversations could get, but it was such a wonderful feeling to feel your voice amplified by the crowd, you know, like literally amplified by the crowd. It was a beautiful feeling, right? But here's the problem, David. At first, it felt very intense, and it felt very real, right? It's like, you know, hey, if somebody wants to get involved with the politics and electoral reform group, then we're going to meet blah 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 blah. Or, you know, we would do stuff where it was like people were donating, and it would even be like, well, you know, you're go to the General Assembly and see if like the General Assembly will agree that you have an official Occupy Wall Street thing, and you'll be able to get money. I mean, it was really stuff like that, right? However, the problem started to, I got so turned off because at a certain point, there were so many people, and there was like 1,000 people or more. I can't remember how many. It was just filled with people at the General Assembly. But things that were coming up were who do we want to do our laundry? Like, that's literally what people were talking about. Like it was like, no, that's not why we're here, man. We're not here to decide who should end up getting our laundry done. No. It's like, this is Occupy freaking Wall Street, you know? Like, it was really like, it was a crazy moment for me, because it was like, no, this doesn't work. It's just for show. This isn't a thing. This isn't what we're here for. So can you bring me home on this, man?
Yeah, look,
Because it's like,
I remember too, Jack, because remember, although I wasn't in New York City, I went to not only Zuccotti Park, but, and I say this honestly, like I probably went to, through the course of the several years, I probably went to over 100 Occupy encampments, because I was traveling on behalf of Move to Amend, the campaign to abolish corporate constitutional rights. That was absolutely and I would sometimes because when I was traveling around, like the Move to Amend team would sometimes in advance say, hey, David is doing a thing, he's touring. Other times, Jack, I would literally, we weren't able to find one, and so I'd do an event at a labor hall or a civic association or a Unitarian church. May the goddess bless the Unitarians. I did so many public events at Unitarian churches.
awesome.
But if I was in the community, then if I would sometimes just walk up to an Occupy camp and say, hey, I have a teach-in on corporate power I'd like to offer. And literally there would be okay, well, hey, mic check to the camp, mic check. And everybody would say, mic check. There is an opportunity for a teach-in. There's an
There's
opportunity
an
for a
opportunity for a
teach-in.
teach-in.
Right. And da da da. Right. So I saw the same thing you saw. Like I saw the power of it and I saw the immediacy of it. And at Zuccotti Park and in Philly at the Occupy anniversary event, I saw the profound limitations of and bluntly the process for the sake of process, as opposed
Yes.
to we're using a process to make and implement decisions about political power,
Yes.
as opposed to, again, a kind of minutia where and frankly an egotism around, well, I need to speak and I need to get my way and we have to just keep talking until I get my way. And it was incredibly frustrating to me.
So frustrating. Yeah.
So this is the point, Jack. I think that creating systems and structures that recognize that authentic relationships are in fact limited, but we still have to do national politics. So we have to have elected representatives to be sure. But I actually think that we would be much better off if we used direct democracy, like for things like, let's vote whether or not we're going to continue to fund the Israeli war machine. Let's just vote on that. And let's vote on whether we conceptually, let's vote on war. Let's vote and let's vote on should we have single payer health care, not the minutia of how to do it, but if we actually voted in this country on how to structure broadly society, we would live in a different society.
Well, one of the things that I think is really important about this project, David, is when I take into the context, I contrast, I juxtapose the national state, right, and the effort that is put into these national elections, right? And then I think about when we talk about the Dunbar number and this small group and intimate relationships, right? One of the things that I think is so amazing, wonderful, and encouraging about the so many different things that we talk about that we want to see, right, is that ultimately what makes it more democratic, what makes it more what makes it, I don't know, more redneck, right, is that what we're seeing is the energy that you put into it, you get back, that you're involved, you're engaged, it's for you in a way that today's society, today our civilization is not. Our civilization is about extracting wealth from labor, yep, right, and it coalescing into the upper echelon, right? So that when you're talking about, what are you talking about? You're talking about public banking. You're talking about co-ops. Well, what does that look like? That looks like I work in this place and I have a say on my labor. I have a say on the product. I have a say what happens in my workplace. Public banking. Well, how is the public budget going to happen? I'm going to have a say in that, right? Like I'm more engaged and more involved in resources and how those resources are allocated, where it's coming from, where it's going, and my role in it, right? And it's like, so it's, what's happening is that there is a more participation. That's what's underlying these different structures, is that your participation is more meaningful. My
Correct.
Participation is more meaningful at a practical level, at a level where like I am receiving a benefit, in a way that I would not otherwise. I am determining how those resources return to me, my family, my community. Right.
It's interesting, Jack, because what you're describing or what we're talking about now is direct democracy. And it's reminding me of one of my favorite guests that we had on Redneck Gone Green, Terry Baricius, who educated us on sortition, where
Yes.
you have representatives, but instead the representatives are literally just chosen by lot or random sample. And dude made a very compelling case. I think that we need to bring Terry back to actually grapple with, this whole notion of elected representation may actually be flawed. And it may be that sortition or or
Well,
random.
I don't know that Terry was necessarily even saying that like elections weren't useful. I think that it was just like it was a way to make things happen that made more sense really than having your elected representatives decide on certain
Yep.
policies,
No, that's
right?
right. I
But
mean, look, I'm trying to
I highly
cram.
recommend, though, if people are watching, to check out our episode with Terry about partition. It was awesome. It was
Yeah.
one of my favorites, and
No,
we
I
definitely should
do
have him
think,
back on.
Jack, like we ought to bring Terry Baricius back. I think we ought to bring Margaret Kimberly of Black Agenda Report back. I mean,
Oh,
we've had several guests, Kali Akuno of Cooperation Jackson. I mean, we've got a lot of stuff, and I know we're coming to the end of the hour, Jack, and I want to like, would you remind me? Have we already decided what we're gonna talk about next week, or because
I
honestly,
feel like,
I've gotten lost.
well, there's just so much stuff, but I'd like to just say that we're going to be really focusing on resist and build. I think that's
Okay.
really what this is going to be about, and you know, also, David, what do you think about like I'm really thinking about like practical steps. I really want to be able to give people like, again, like, you know, people who are so sick of things, they want to be able to do something. They know things are wrong. They don't need to be convinced. What they need to have is like a like a direction, like some directions on how to get from point A to point B. Does I mean, can we do some more of that, do you think?
Yeah, let's think about that so that we can actually, instead of just being opaque or general, we can actually get a little more concrete and specific. So, folks, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for joining us here on Redneck Gone Green, whether you're watching or listening to us live or watching a video recording or a podcast. Remember that we're ordinary folks, Jack and I, and we only exist because of your support. So we want to thank you, and please continue to share this podcast. If you're listening to it, if you're watching a video, share it. Let people know that we exist. We are going to be making a shift here on Redneck Gone Green and try to make sure that we stay very concrete about the kind of things that ordinary people can do in order to win the world that we so desperately need and so richly deserve. Jack, I love you. Take good care of yourself. We'll see y'all next week.
Love you too, David. Bye, everybody.